Today, we're going to be talking about adventures in travel and how we can become more confident when we travel as women. I've talked to a ton of women, and they're either the ones planning the trips for the family or they've been hesitant to travel on their own. The kids are out of the nest, their husbands maybe don't want to or not in a condition to go travel, but I don't want to plan the trips. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know how I'm supposed to do it safely. So I've brought in a friend of mine, Kim Barber. She owns Globetrotter Travel. We met through a networking group a couple years ago, and I actually just used her back in February to book a trip to Cancun, and it was the most easy, seamless thing ever. And I'm like, why did I not do this sooner in life? So, welcome, Kim. Thank you for being here
Thank
with
you.
us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so do you mind giving a little background of your business, how long you've been a travel agent or travel consultant, and if there's
Mhm.
a difference between those two? Because I did see that you're technically a consultant, but is that different than an agent?
Sure. It is not different. They're travel agent, travel advisor, travel consultant, just all similar. According to the American Society of Travel Advisors, they've rebranded in recent years and like advisor, but all different names for the same thing, basically. Yeah, I've had my business, Globetrotter Travel, as of earlier this year, 10 years. So 10 years of Globetrotter Travel. Prior to that, I did work as a travel advisor at a storefront agency as well. So all in, I've probably been an advisor close to 13, 14 years with some additional experience in travel and tourism. Prior to that, I worked for a tour company when I was in college. And then at the end of my program, my degree for college, I went to Australia and New Zealand and I worked for some tour companies there. So my path has always been travel and tourism, probably 13 years all in as a travel advisor.
That's awesome. I guess I didn't
Yeah.
realize you'd been in it like from the start. So what made you want to get into travel? Did you travel a lot as a kid and you thought, this is really fun, I want to continue doing as an adult? Or kind of how did all that transpire into
Yeah.
a lifelong career?
Yeah, I actually didn't know necessarily what I wanted to do. I chose my university after high school and kind of went in undecided. I always enjoyed traveling, but I really didn't do a ton of traveling growing up, at least not. We did domestic trips, we did road trips and things like that, a lot of camping. But when I was in high school, I did my first kind of international big trip, which was a student group to Europe. And I think that gave me the travel bug. But then I went to CMU, Central Michigan, and I got there and I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I was at a major fair and I just stumbled across like tourism, hospitality, recreation. So I took that path. And within the recreation department at CMU, there's actually a lot of different paths you can take, but tourism and travel is really just what stood out to me. So that's the way I went at that point. And even when I was going through that program at CMU, I don't think I necessarily ever saw myself as a travel advisor. That I was 18, 19 years old. I had never used a travel advisor myself. I didn't necessarily know how viable that career path necessarily was. But yeah, here I am. I landed here after I was in Australia and New Zealand and working for those tour companies. Of course, I loved it. But that whole experience living and working abroad solo really made me realize that I wanted to be closer to home, closer to family. And so at that point, particularly when I came back, there weren't a ton of remote jobs in travel and tourism available. And of course, Michigan is a very seasonal sort of tourism market. I started working at a travel agency, a storefront then, and that's been the way that I've been able to work in tourism consistently while still staying in Michigan and being close to family.
That's awesome. I didn't realize you went to CMU. Fire up chips.
Yes. You
Yeah.
too?
Yes, me too.
Oh, awesome.
It's funny how, and we talk about business stuff, but we don't, when you pull back however many years ago it was, like, we don't talk about that. That is.
I love that. I'm actually working with the CMU Alumni Association on all of their kind of big trips. That's actually one of the next trips I'm doing is in May. I'm going with the CMU Alumni Association on a Rhine River cruise.
Nice. Okay, so those emails that we get about the alumni doing trips, you're part of those.
I
Okay, good to
am.
know. Okay, so where was your last big trip? So not domestically, but like
Mhm.
internationally, you travel a ton, like all of the time it feels like. But like where was your last big trip and what kind of made you choose that location?
Yeah, my most recent large trip was in January. I did a 2 week trip to Norway. It was a coastal, it's a unique itinerary, coastal express kind of Cruise isn't really the right word because it's nothing like a typical cruise, but it was on a ship, more like a ferry kind of style ship. It was basically up the coast of Norway and then back down is the route we took. The company we went with does use it as like a ferry and a means of moving goods throughout Norway in the winter. So the locals really rely on it. But as a tourism product, the main selling points are like really fun winter activities like dog sledding and northern lights viewing, snowmobiling, things like that. For me, the primary draw was the chance of seeing the northern lights, which we were able to see one time. Yes, it was amazing. It was a really interesting experience, unlike any other trip I've ever done, being north of the Arctic Circle in January when they're in the polar night. So there's only 3 hours of daylight isn't even really the right word because it's not actually daylight, it's just like twilight, but really interesting experience. Glad I did it. I would love to go back and do the same trip in summer and experience that midnight sun phenomenon north of the Arctic Circle as well. But yeah, it was a really cool experience, unlike any other trip I've done before.
That's awesome. And you found a deal on it? Was there a girlfriend? Did you go as a family? Like, how did you end up choosing there? Because I feel like
Yeah,
the world is so big that there's so many places that we do tend to go to places we've been before because it's familiar and it's comfortable. But like, how do you
right.
choose that new place and all that fun thing, all that fun stuff?
Yeah, in the case of that trip, I had a good friend who I travel with often, and she really wanted to do a Northern Lights trip, as did I. And I researched some different options. I've booked Northern Lights trips for clients before, but we settled on that one because it was a more economical way we could do it. Some of the Northern Lights trips where you go and stay in the igloos and all of that, they're amazing, but they can be very expensive. And we were trying to, recognizing that I travel pretty frequently, we were trying to be a little bit more economical about it. So that's how we settled on it. So it started out as the two of us. And then my mom actually joined us because she loves winter and she really wanted to do the Northern Lights. And then I had an aunt and uncle that joined us as well. So it turned into a little bit of a small group, which was fun. Again, the ship we were on isn't a typical cruise ship at all. So there's no entertainment or anything provided other than, of course, the scenery and the Northern Lights viewing. So it was nice to have a small group because we could play cards and we brought games and stuff with us and entertained ourselves those nights when the Northern Lights were not out.
That's awesome. So
Yeah.
the economical portion, I'm going to ask about that because I
Yeah.
feel like there's so many ways. How are you able to find the best deals? Like when you booked Cancun for me, you were awesome. I said, we want to go around these dates. I didn't even give you a price range, but you were able to create a variety of ranges. Like, how do you work through that? And how would somebody else who's working through that on their own to try to find that economical price of we've got a family of 8 and we want to travel or we want to go on this
Right.
trip? Where should someone start to look for that?
Yeah, great question. I think for me, because I'm planning trips all day, every day, and a lot of the, I'd say 95% of the time, it's repeat destinations. It's trips that I've planned previously. So I have an idea of where to start. So for Cancun, Dominican Republic, things like that, that are very popular from Michigan, especially in the winter months, I know just, I guess, from experience that we have these seasonal nonstop charter flights that leave out of Lansing and go to those warm weather destinations. And I've spent the last 5 years basically comparing Lansing, Detroit, Grand Rapids, comparing different suppliers. And ultimately, I know that these, in particular, the nonstop charter flights out of Lansing, they end up being more affordable than people I think. A lot of the time, when you look at flying out of Lansing compared to Grand Rapids or Detroit, they can be more expensive because it's a smaller airport, fewer airlines, fewer options. But because these charter flights come in from January to April, it can be a really affordable option. I guess if somebody didn't want to work with a travel advisor and they wanted to do the planning themselves, I think that it's really just a matter of doing some research, doing your due diligence. Something I always tell people is if you're going to book a trip yourself, particularly when it comes to flights, book your flights directly with the airline that you're flying. Like use Google Flights as a searching tool or whatever other website you want to use to search for flights. But when it comes to actually booking them, always book directly with the airline because if there are any delays or cancellations or issues or anything that come up and you don't have a travel advisor to help you through those, the airline will be much more willing and available to help you if you've booked directly versus if you've booked through like a third party website.
So like booking.com, Expedia, because those are packages that I've used in the past, but I've
Sure.
never had delays. But I did not know that if there are hiccups You're lower on that priority list compared to those who book directly.
Absolutely. And if things go according to plan, then it's great. But when things don't go according to plan, which we know is a part of travel, unfortunately, particularly in winter months in the climate that we live in, if you had booked it through booking.com, for example, and then your flight gets canceled, you go up to the Delta counter or call Delta customer service to get help with rebooking or whatever, and they're going to look into your reservation and say, oh, you booked this with a third party, you have to call them to have them help you. And then historically, you call that third party booking engine, whoever it was. Very often the customer service is not ideal. It's usually outsourced. And then they very often will say, oh, it's the day of travel. You actually have to go to the airline. And you get this back and forth runaround situation. And it's very frustrating. And I've learned over the years that it's really never worth it to book a flight through a platform like that. And one of the ways that I learned that I think the most was during 2020, 2021. A lot of people who were not formerly my clients ended up coming to me because they were just in this constant runaround with all of the COVID cancellations of I booked it through Expedia, but now Delta's canceled the flight and Expedia can't help me and Delta can't help me. And can you help me? And so I actually gained a lot of clients during that time from people that were just like so getting the runaround and so frustrated with that whole process. Yeah, ultimately, I think there's obviously I'm a little bit biased, but I think there's a lot of advantages to having a travel advisor because we can help you work through a lot of that stuff. But I recognize some people like to do their own planning, or for whatever reason, if you've got miles or points to use or whatever it is, sometimes you have to book through certain channels. But when it comes to flights, it's really always best to book directly with the airline.
Okay, that's good to know
Yeah,
because I think when we're new to travel, we go to the Google search bar, and those are the ones that get paid to have their ads up there. So we click on
sure.
them, we move forward. But then when we have a bad experience, it makes us not want to travel or
Right.
get frustrated with whatever it is. So if we start moving into, have you always felt confident traveling? Do you do a lot of traveling alone? And did you feel confident, or did it take you like practicing more locally to get confident being able to go to Europe? Yeah, you did that with a group, but you still probably wandered off on your own and there was probably still a little bit of fear in there, right?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yes, my first big international trip outside of Canada, which doesn't really feel international when you live in Michigan, I think. But my first big international trip was that kind of student group to Europe, and we did a lot of countries. That I think just felt different because I was a teenager and I had chaperones and things like that. I think for me, it did take practice. It did not come naturally. It did not happen on my first trip. I think when it really hit me was when I was finishing my degree at CMU and I decided to do my 30 weeks of internship. That was like the last requirement of my degree. I had always wanted to study abroad and it hadn't happened yet. And I decided I was taking my last opportunity to study abroad and go and do my internships overseas. And in my head, I'm like 20, 21. I feel like I'm really confident and independent and I can do this. And I just remember because it was an internship, it wasn't like I went with a study abroad group. Like I really did go independently, flew by myself, apartment by myself. And I remember getting to my first one, which was in Wellington, New Zealand. And I just was so overwhelmed when I got there. Wellington, New Zealand, now I know is a pretty small city. But for me, growing up in a small town and then moving to Mount Pleasant, and then from Mount Pleasant, like Wellington felt massive. So I just remember being so overwhelmed, like really intimidated, feeling really alone. And luckily that was short lived. I was there for maybe 5 or 6 days before my internship started. So started my internship, had a really good coworker who was like close in age who became a really good friend. She showed me around and made me feel comfortable. And then I started meeting some people and I eventually did get a roommate. So it took some time though. It did not come naturally. And then even after that experience, I went from New Zealand to Australia for that internship, came home, started working in travel. It took a few years, I think, before I was comfortable like doing a trip by myself. But ultimately, as my business grew, it became a necessity. In a perfect world, my husband or my friends, I could always have somebody with me, but that's just not the case. A lot of the times, although it looks really fun and glamorous, maybe on social media, a lot of the times we're on work trips and you can't bring anybody. It's a travel advisor trip, and you either have to have a travel advisor roommate or you have a room to yourself or something like that. So it definitely took some practice. It doesn't happen immediately, but I think it's one of those things, the more you do it, the more comfortable you become. Now it's just like second nature to me, but I hear it all the time. I primarily work with women when it comes to planning trips, and I hear it probably at least twice a week. Like, I'm hesitant to travel by myself, or concerns about safety and things like that. Yeah, it definitely did not come naturally. It took time.
So when those questions come up of I'm concerned about safety, I'm going somewhere new, there's 100 logistics. How am I gonna keep all of my things straight? What type of advice do you tend to give them so that they feel confident booking the trip? One, not just because they can reach out to you no matter when, but also so that when they walk in the airport, they feel confident that they're gonna get in the right line. They're not going to be thrown off by the please take your belt and shoes and all the yelling that happens because
Right.
nobody listens. So how do you help them feel confident in that so that when they book the trip, they're like, okay, I feel good.
Yeah. Yes, you're absolutely right. Particularly when I'm working with somebody, reassuring them that I am available if they need. I try to emphasize that if it's like a true emergency, reach out to me. If it's something that you can handle on your own, please try to do that, because I do have a lot of people traveling and try to have a work-life balance at some point. But I am available. I certainly do help people when things come up when they are traveling. I also very often am booking a lot of international trips with suppliers or local companies who have 24/7 emergency support, like in the destination. So if for some reason I am not available or something happens like locally, that you have another point of contact of somebody you can reach out to, which is reassuring for people. And then I just give a lot of tips and tricks when people are really concerned about that. Different, obviously, making sure that you understand your international phone coverage if you're traveling internationally and what that looks like. And then some apps to download that, for example, if you don't have data or calling capabilities internationally, you can download WhatsApp. And a lot of other countries kind of use WhatsApp as their primary messaging and calling app. And so it's really easy, basically around the whole world, to use that app to be able to communicate if anything comes up while you're traveling. I think I do a lot of that to make people feel comfortable. And especially for women, when safety is a concern, if somebody's going on a girls' trip to Mexico to an all inclusive or something. I think I just emphasize, obviously, if you're going to an all inclusive, you maybe are drinking, you want to have a good time, but just particularly if you have a large group, regardless of if you have a large group or not, but just being aware of your surroundings, maybe making sure there's at least one person who's being the one who's holding back a little bit one day and being the one to watch out for things. I've traveled to Mexico and the Caribbean countless times solo or on a girls' trip, and I've never once had an experience where I've felt unsafe. I know those experiences do happen. And so I think just being aware of your surroundings and still staying responsible, even though you are on vacation, is a big one that I always mention. And luckily, I've actually never had a client. I have a lot of people come to me with those fears, but I've never had anybody really have an experience where they had a unsafe sort of feeling or situation while they were traveling. That's the nice thing, that I haven't ever had anyone encounter that.
Yeah. And I guess for me too, when I think about, okay, I'm going to Cancun, I'm at an all-inclusive. Why would I want to leave the resort? I feel like some
Right.
people like to leave, but if you're gonna leave, why not just stay off the resort and do your stay off? To me, I'm like, just paid for the all-inclusive. Why wouldn't I just stay? I got the transportation from the airport to the hotel, so I know I'm safe. Like, why would I want to go venture on my own? But
Right.
that's also like where my brain and personality is.
And you're absolutely right. I've been to Cancun so many times that for me, it's, yeah, I've done the excursions, I've done a lot of the things. I'm usually, if I'm going to Cancun, I'm leading a group, or if I'm going on my own sort of vacation type trip, I want to unwind. I just want to relax. For me, it's not a huge priority. I lead a women's group every year to Mexico or the Caribbean. And we do generally do one or two group excursions because a lot of people do enjoy that. But that's another thing I tell people. If you do want to leave the resort, totally fine option. There are many things to do and see. But I always recommend doing it through like the recommended excursion companies that I have vetted that I know are reliable, because there, as we all know, there is some amount of crime that does happen everywhere in the world. Mexico gets some news reports on those sorts of things. I like to make sure that the tours that people are going on are vetted, they're reputable companies. And again, because I've had many people go through them and I've never had an issue. And actually, for my own personal trips, I work with those same companies for any excursions or things that I want to do as well. So there's a lot of things you can do to just make sure that you're traveling safely, making smart choices. If you're not somebody who does want to stay at the resort the whole time, you do have options.
So excursions are really good because I think no matter where you go, there's always something fun you can do. Who do you book through? And if we think going to Cancun, I feel like the resort you stay at always has their preferred people. Are those people
Absolutely.
that we should be able to trust because the hotel's partnered with them, or are those ones where we should still do our own due diligence and look elsewhere?
That's a really good question. I get this question a lot too. If they're actually, and basically every all inclusive resort in Mexico, the Dominican, has excursion desk people within the resort. So if they're within the resort, they have been vetted, you can feel confident booking with them. That being said, and this is total personal preference, because some people know in advance exactly the excursions they want to do. And if you're somebody who knows what you want to do ahead of time, my recommendation is to get it booked ahead of time so you're not wasting time on your vacation standing in the excursion line to book. But that being said, if you're like spontaneous and you want to know your options, and then you certainly can, but there's generally a bit of a wait to book through the excursion desks at the resort. So total personal preference. But yes, if they're inside the actual resort, they are reputable, they are vetted. And even if you want to take a taxi to go somewhere and the resort actually calls you a taxi, you know that it's a reputable taxi company too.
Okay, so when you're at the resort, it's a place you can trust.
Yes,
Great.
yes. I've never
Yes.
had any issues at any of the resorts I've stayed at or toured. Obviously, there are some stories out there on the internet where people have had unfortunate experiences, and I think that those are just what they are, unfortunate experiences.
Mhm.
But yes, I've never had any issues with any of the companies that are within the actual resort with booking their excursions.
Awesome. So now let's go to the other side of the pond. So you've got Europe, you've got Spain, you've got, I just last year, my sister and I did Barcelona and Madrid, and it was awesome. It was beautiful. We booked it all on our own. She found the cheapest Google flights. We booked through
Mm-hmm.
our airline, and then I found hotels. I did all the searching. And then we booked a few things. We went and saw the soccer stadium in Barcelona, which was awesome. A lot of miscommunication because their normal stadium was under construction, so we had to go to the Olympic Stadium. So, like, some
Okay.
of that logistics, it can
Mm-hmm.
be frustrating when it comes to travel and a language barrier. Are there certain apps you recommend for the language barrier or certain things that we should have printed off beforehand of, hey, we're in a new country, my phone doesn't have service, the SIM card's not working like I thought it was going to. Like, what do you recommend people always have a copy of so that when they are somewhere where it's challenging to get somebody to maybe
Mm-hmm.
understand them or to find a safe spot to ask questions, like what should they always have with them for those safety areas?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I've maybe gotten a little bit lazy in my travel because I am confident now. So like I do have the Google Translate app on my phone. I rarely use it, but I have it. So that's a really good one to have. There's a number of translate apps out there, but that's the one I have. I've had it forever. I do know that I have an international phone plan, so I know that basically anywhere I'm traveling in the world, I will have service, but I know that is not the case for everybody. So I think if you're unsure, it's always worth checking with your phone carrier before you travel internationally. Admittedly, I've become very dependent on using my phone for directions and things like that when I am traveling. But that being said, if you don't have service, I think there's ways you can download like the offline maps. So you know that you've got the ability to, at least if you're a little bit lost, or you can at least look at your offline map. I think the same thing would be true. Before smartphones, I think people probably carried like a translator. They actually make translator devices, or they did at one point. I guess I don't know if they still do, but there are
Okay.
translator devices. I imagine there's probably offline versions of translators and things like that too. The other thing that I always make sure people have if they're going like international to somewhere where if you go to Mexico, they accept US dollars. So you don't really have to understand the difference in currency. But in Europe, to have a currency converter app on your phone, because If you're in a store or a restaurant and you're like, you don't understand the conversion, you can just quick pop it into the currency conversion app and have an understanding of what that looks like. So those are some of the things that come to mind. But admittedly, I have become pretty dependent on my phone when I'm traveling for those sorts of things.
Yeah, we use the Google Maps because like you could circle your area and then you could download that offline. So we did that because like we had an international plan, but we didn't get the unlimited gigs. And my sister and I are on the same plan. So we didn't know if we were
Okay.
sharing the gigs or
Oh, yeah.
if we were like, no, each phone got it. So like we did that just to be on the safe side. And then when we were at the hotel, we used the Wi-Fi to
Sure.
like make sure we were saving some of that just in case. Um,
Yeah.
Passport, photocopy, no photocopy. What's important when
Definitely.
it comes to that?
Yeah, definitely have a photocopy and or a picture on your phone of your passport. There's actually, it's pretty evenly split 50-50 what people say when it comes to keeping your passport on you while you're traveling versus leaving it like in a hotel safe, for example. And honestly, I'm also pretty 50-50 on it. It depends on where I am. It depends on how comfortable I feel leaving it in the safe versus having it on my person. There are some countries, I don't know if it's still the case, but when I lived in New Zealand, I was very recently 21. And if you wanted to go to the bar and order a drink, if you didn't have a local identification, you had to show your passport. I think I've gotten very comfortable holding my passport and keeping it on me. I know some people are less comfortable with that. And of course, there is the potential for someone to steal it or for it to get lost. I've never had that experience. I'm always checking, like when I have it on me, I'm double checking it. But yeah, I think having a copy in the case that it does get lost or stolen or whatever, like having that copy, photocopy in your luggage or a picture on your phone or both, or if you have a travel companion, having pictures of each other's is a good idea. I've never needed to use it, but I definitely travel with those copies.
Okay, so have a copy. And then like when we're out and about and we've got a bag. When we were in
Yeah.
Barcelona, they told us don't ever wear a backpack because of the pickpocketers. Like always do something that goes in front of you. Is that
Yep.
just a rule of thumb we should have when we're just in a busy city in general? Is that just a good rule of thumb?
Absolutely. And there are cities where the pickpocketers are like more common than others. But I guess if we're talking about Europe as a large destination, any large city, any train that you're on, or like bus, yes, it is certainly backpacks are risky. They're not necessarily the cutest of travel attire, but there are companies, Travelon, Bagolini, some of those that make the what's the word I'm looking for? Like
Yes.
they can't be, yeah, they can't be like cut, the straps can't be cut. There are companies that make those sort of products that are making you feel a little bit safer. I just have like a crossbody typically that I wear in the front.
Yeah.
And again, I've never had an issue, but I also, being that I'm pretty aware of those situations, like if I'm at the Eiffel Tower on a July day and it's really busy and I know that there's pickpocketers across around the Eiffel Tower, not only do I keep my bag on my front, I also just keep a hand on it. And I've never had an experience where I've had an issue, but I'm just like aware about it enough. And I know that it would be a very stressful situation if something were to happen. The other thing that I do, like I do generally keep my passport on my person because that's where I'm comfortable. But if I've say I have 400 euros with me, I would maybe leave half of that in the hotel. So if something were to happen in the safe, if something were to happen to my bag, God forbid, then I would still have some of my money and a credit card or something. I split up whatever's in my wallet and leave some in the hotel and some on my person.
That's a good idea. I've heard you say you hotel safe. There,
Mm-hmm.
my mom has always used it. I use it about 50% of the time. The time I don't use it, it's because the staff has the ability to reset the code. So if anybody's coming in, won't it be a staff member and won't they be able to just reset? So then I come up with all these reasons not to justify locking something up because we all have these
Right.
justifications. But it sounds like no matter what, you should just use the safe because it's adding that extra layer of security there.
Yeah.
No matter
I
where
mean,
you're
that Yeah, that's my opinion. You're absolutely right. Things can still get taken from safes. I remember a story a few years ago where this whole family, I think they were in Rome. They got there a couple days before their cruise left. They put all their passports and things in the safe and then came back to their hotel and the safe had been stolen. Things happen. Like that is a terrible situation. That being said, I've never had any issue when I've used the safe. Honestly, the only issue I've had is occasionally I've forgotten something when I go to leave the hotel to get it out of the safe. So I'm pretty diligent now about that. But I don't know. It makes me feel better. I know that like on a women's trip I did a couple years ago. It was our first night, I'm pretty sure. Some of the other women normally, like almost always, use the safe, but they got there, they were excited, they got their suits on, we went to the pool, and I'm trying to remember the exact situation. They didn't put their stuff in the safe. So ultimately a lot of the cash that they were carrying was stolen out of their room. We reported it, we filed the travel insurance claim, we did all the things. Ultimately they ended up getting reimbursed. But that was a learning experience. She said at the time, when I travel with my husband, we always use the safe. I forgot. Yeah, things can happen either way, but I always feel a little bit better when I've got some of that stuff locked up but I'm pretty good about splitting it up, keeping some on my person, keeping some in the safe. So if something happens one way or the other, I'm covered.
I saw something where it's like you put your shoe in the safe because you'll never go home without your shoe. So like whatever shoes you're wearing to the airport, put those in the safe so that when you go to put them on, like you're looking for your shoe and then you know you'll open the safe type of
That
thing.
is that is very smart. I'll never forget. It didn't happen to me specifically with something as important as a passport, but I was in Kenya at a conference with a group of travel advisors. It was the day that we were leaving. We had checked out of the hotel that we stayed at, and we had, I don't know, 6 hours until our flight. So we had set up like some hotel tours basically of some other hotels before we went to the airport. So we checked out of our hotel. We go to this other hotel. We're doing room tours. And the woman who's giving us the room tour makes a point to point out where the safe is in the room. And this one of my travel companions went, she remembered in that moment that her passport was in the safe at the hotel. Luckily for her, we still had plenty of time. We still had some friends who were at the hotel. So they were able to work with the hotel staff to get the passport for her and bring it to her at the airport. It all worked out. But I'll never forget that because I have forgotten things here and there in the safe. Nothing as serious as a passport. But I like the shoe idea. That's very smart.
Yeah, the shoe idea, I saw that and I'm like, oh, okay. Or something that you know you're gonna wear to the airport that you have to take
Yeah,
with you. I'm
right,
always double checking like under the bed. Most beds now, like you can't even stick anything underneath, but I'm always
right.
down on the ground looking. Did I leave a charger? Did I leave a sock? Because it's always terrible. Whether you travel to a friend's house or you travel across the world and you come back and you're missing something small and you're like, really? Come on, if I would have
Yep,
slowed down instead of
yep.
rushing out because I was enjoying
But
more
generally,
time.
yes. And generally, when you're traveling, you are a little bit frazzled, especially if you don't do it very often, or even if you do it often. I get frazzled if I am in a hurry to be somewhere or thought I had more time than I actually do. Inevitably, I always end up frazzled and it does happen. But luckily for me, I've never lost anything of significance.
When we travel airlines, what types of tips can you share for when I tell people you can take food through TSA, which is great. So you don't have to buy snacks in there. You can't take obviously like full waters because that's over the
Yeah.
ounces. But like when somebody's packing their bag to go through that's not being checked, like what sorts
Yep.
of things should they always have in whether it's a backpack, that crossbody bag, or if they're taking a carry-on, what should they always make sure to pack for themselves and have
Good
with
idea.
them rather than checking that bag?
Yes, great question. I am a firm believer. This has taken time and practice as well. I will avoid checking a bag as often as possible. My most recent big trip to Norway, I could not avoid it. It was 2 weeks in the Arctic Circle. Like I needed some warm weather gear. So I did have to check a bag. But whenever possible, I avoid it. I recognize that not everybody can do that. For me, I generally am only in a carry on. So everything I need is in that bag. But for a lot of people, if they are checking a bag, and a lot of people will do this for the convenience of, oh, I don't want to carry a bag through the airport. I'm going to check it and just carry like a small purse, which in theory is great. And if your luggage doesn't get lost, great. You had an easy time walking through the airport. But I always recommend having at least one change of clothes, full change of clothes, anything that you absolutely need, medication, keys, passports, electronics, valuables, which I don't travel with a lot of valuables, but I do work when I travel. So I do have like my work computer, sometimes an iPad. So all of that should be anything that is absolutely necessary. If your luggage were to get lost and you're on a 7 day trip, if your luggage is lost for the duration of that trip and you have medication that you need, that should be on your person. But then as far as like extra, like I always travel with an empty water bottle so I can fill it up once I'm past security. Snacks, because airport snacks are expensive, particularly when I'm traveling with my son. I have all of the snacks. Yeah, I think it comes down to personal preference. Some people just would rather pay and have the convenience of buying a water bottle once they get through. I'm thrifty in that I'd rather just have my own bottle and refill it. But yeah, absolutely. Keys, medications, electronics, anything that if your bag was lost, a change of clothes, depending on the climate you're going to, maybe like a rain jacket or whatever it is, anything that if your luggage was lost, you could get by for a day or two.
Got it. And yeah, I've got status with Delta. So every time we fly, me and whoever I fly with gets two free checked bags. I typically take a backpack and all that's in there is my laptop because that's the biggest, bulkiest thing, and I can't put it in my little fanny pack. But like, other than that, in my backpack, I have like, chargers and any medication that I need, which is very little, but that's usually in the fanny pack that goes in that backpack. Everything
Right.
else I ship because I'm like, why not? But it makes
Yes.
sense for me, when we're flying somewhere domestically, it probably is more of a no-brainer. Check that bag. I can go to a Walmart. I can go somewhere else and get clothes. Is it an inconvenience? Yes. Going to Cancun, going to Europe, there's a lot more logistics if you end up with new
Yes.
clothes. So I guess that's
Absolutely.
where I see the difference of domestically, go for it. Internationally, be, for me at least, be a little bit more cautious of what I'm keeping on hand.
Absolutely. And I think that it wasn't always this way. And I certainly see the appeal of checking a bag. I also have status with Delta. So, like, I get the free checked bags. Like, it is convenient in a lot of ways to not carry everything that you're taking on a trip with you. And I've also been fortunate. I've never had my luggage lost, but I have traveled with people. I've led people on groups whose luggage never did show up. A couple years ago, I had a big extended family cruise. We left out of London. We all flew into London the day before the cruise, and my aunt and uncle's bags did not arrive. And they did have carry ons with a lot of things, items that they needed. But luckily, they both had travel insurance. So they got there and they knew they looked at their insurance and they knew they got X amount per day to spend for their luggage being lost. So we had that extra day before we left on the cruise. So they went shopping and bought those things that they weren't sure if their bag would catch up to them on the cruise ship or not. So they went shopping and got those things. And luckily their bags did arrive. I'm trying to remember if it was the first day of the cruise or the second day. They did arrive, but they had the ability to buy some of those things. But you're absolutely right. Domestically, it is easier to replace things if you need to. Internationally, stores are different, sizes are different. It's just a little bit more challenging. It could be fun if you had like free time, but it could also be really stressful if you didn't have that free time built in to go shopping because your luggage is lost. I always make sure people have, at the very least, medications, keys, the valuables on them.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, I just got a checked bag or no, a carry-on for Christmas for my sister. Oh, I believe it's the
Mm,
Away brand. I used it in Cancun and loved it, but it's so nice and sturdy and lightweight. Is there a carry-on suitcase that you recommend
yeah.
that people are like, I've traveled a ton, these ones suck, these ones are great. These ones are great, but also don't cost a fortune. Because I think that's the other
Right.
part about luggage. So do you have a few
Yes.
recommendations on that?
Yeah, and I have a few thoughts. Ultimately, I also have Away brand luggage. That was a big splurge I did, I don't know, 2 years ago now, because I do travel a lot. And historically, I've just gone to TJ Maxx and bought whatever bag. And then what lasts me a year because I'm traveling with it 10, 12 times. And then eventually it falls apart or it's been beaten up by the airline. And so I just replace it. And I got tired of doing that. I like Away and some of the other brands, Soul Guard, Monos. There's a couple brands similar to Away that have a lifetime replacement guarantee. So
Mhm.
it is a harder pill to swallow up front with the cost of the bag, but knowing that in theory you would never need to buy another bag, that's nice. I will say that the Away luggage, for example, as far as I know, is primarily hard side. And I like hard side for a lot of things. But sometimes when I'm packing, I prefer a soft side bag. It really, I think, comes down to personal preference. So I'll use my Away carry on for certain trips. For other trips where I'm really like trying to cram a little bit more in my carry on than I should be, I will use the soft side bag. But ultimately, the non negotiable for me is it has to have four spinner wheels. That's two wheeled bags. I am done with that phase of my life.
Locks or no locks? Mine has a lock. I used it. Is it important to either have a single lock or to lock your bag?
Yeah, in my opinion and experience, I do travel with a lock. Even if I'm only traveling with a carry-on, I do put a lock on it in case I have to gate check it or anything like that. I did one time, this was a learning experience for me, probably 10 years ago. I was in the Dominican Republic, wasn't feeling very well. I did check a bag on that trip. And I was packing, but not necessarily like thinking as clearly as I would have been if I was feeling better. And I packed not a terribly expensive watch, but a fossil sort of limited edition watch that I had and loved. I packed it in my checked bag. And actually, that bag did have a lock on it. But on my way home, we had a layover and it was stolen. I assume it went through a TSA check as we were coming back into the US from the Dominican. It went through obviously a screening or something. And when I got home, I realized number one, I should have never packed that watch in my checked bag, should keep valuables on me. Number two, that it had been stolen. So of course, I had a lock in that scenario, and TSA can still open those locks. But it does make me feel better if I'm have to gate check my bag, or if I get to my hotel and my room's not ready because it's before check-in time, and I have to store my bag at reception or whatever. That I've got a lock on it. Obviously, they're not. You could get into it if you wanted to, but it just is just another peace of mind for me. So I always travel with a lock on my bag, but yeah, personal preference really.
Yeah, I like it. Currently, I've been going to Planet Fitness and I didn't have a real lock, and you have to bring your own lock. Or you have to buy one when you get there. All I have
Mm-hmm.
is my TSA travel lock. That actually keeps your locker shut. So if you don't
Yep.
have a real like combo, use your travel bag lock. Don't go out and buy another
Yes.
lock.
And travel locks, they're inexpensive. I used to have one with keys and I could never find the keys. So I just have combination ones now. But yeah, you could buy them at TJ Maxx. I'm sure you could buy them on Amazon. They're cheap. They're a couple bucks. Probably cheaper than getting like a real old school metal lock.
And yeah, I had to do one of those recently. I'm like, I don't even know where the code is because I had scratched the code off on the back. And I'm like,
Yep.
I don't know. I feel
Yep.
like we need to just pitch this lock at this point.
Yep, yep. And I have way too many travel locks at this point. I probably own 10 of them, but they all have the same code. So I know that whatever lock I put on my bag, it's the same code.
Awesome. So, any last minute advice, do's and don'ts, reminders for women when they travel, things that you want to share as we wrap up, things that maybe we just didn't touch on?
Yeah, I think we touched on a lot of it. It does take practice. I think you're not going to be comfortable traveling solo or traveling with your kids or whatever the situation is until you've done it a few times. So if it's something that you're interested in but are hesitant about, maybe start with a domestic trip. Maybe start 3 or 4 days domestically where your language will be spoken and you don't have to deal with some of the currency conversion and things like that, but you can still get some practice traveling solo. I think that's a great way to start. I mean, there is something really, I love traveling with my husband. I love traveling with other people, but traveling with my girlfriends or traveling solo, there's something really like confident building about it. It does. And honestly, for as much as I do love traveling with other people, there's something really freeing about just being entirely on your own schedule, especially after you become a mom and you realize how valuable and precious that actually is. When you're traveling solo and it is a vacation, or you really get to determine what time you wake up and what activities you're doing and when. I definitely encourage women. I recognize that not everyone loves to travel and not everyone's comfortable with it, but I definitely encourage you to give it a try and even start domestically on a smaller scale to get your feet wet. I think it's definitely worthwhile. And if you are interested in traveling solo, or if you don't have a travel companion to go with you, there are some really good tour companies out there that do like women only trips, women led trips. They'll do certain departures that are just for women. So I think those can be really good options if you want to travel, but you don't have a friend or someone to travel with. There are options out there for tours you can join or trips you can join, and you can meet other people, but still have that experience of traveling independently.
That's awesome. I'm gonna circle back to the CMU alumni trips. It's maybe you don't know anyone who's an alumni that wants to go on this trip. You go that you've got something in common with somebody. That's a really good reminder is just because a solo trip doesn't mean you have to go and be at a hotel on your own and be alone the whole time. It can mean you're flying on your own to a destination or you're meeting up with people you've never met, but you're doing it on your own without your husband, your friend, your children, whatever that is.
Absolutely. And I do a lot of travel. One of the ways that I enjoy traveling is cruising. The cruise I just did to Norway earlier this year was, I think, my 31st cruise. So I've done a lot, but last year for the first time I did a cruise solo, and it was solo in that I was in a room by myself. When I went, I didn't know anybody, but I volunteer for an organization and we were leading a travel advisor trip. So I was the host of that trip. So we all were in our own rooms, but we met up on the ship. We did some activities together. We had this 8-night cruise basically, and it was a really great experience. And I think cruises can be another really great way if not everybody likes to cruise, but if you are open to cruising, and ocean cruises and river cruising is nothing like ocean cruising. So if the thought of ocean cruising isn't appealing to you, but maybe river cruising in Europe is, and getting to see 7 or 8 different towns and cities, but having your hotel move with you so you don't have to unpack and repack repeatedly, it can be a really nice option. And that experience cruising solo for me made me realize how good like that could be for people who don't have anyone to travel with, but still want to maybe have the opportunity to be social. A lot of cruise lines have like solo traveler meetups. There are a lot of the newer or the more recent ships have solo traveler rooms, like studio rooms. And then there's like a lounge for the solo travelers. I think the world of travel is becoming a little bit more friendly for people traveling solo or independently, and still, again, like you said, having opportunities to be with other people and be social and not be fully alone, even if you don't have someone to travel with.
I love that. So, how can people get in contact with you, ask you questions, work with you? Do you work with people outside of the Lansing area? Any of that type of stuff. And remember, we will put all of the links and anything else that Kim provides in the show notes. So her email will be there, website, things like that. But I'm also going to have her share because sometimes we don't go look at the show notes unless we know what's in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Reach out via email is probably the quickest way to get a hold of me if I am traveling with a group or anything. My email is kimbarber@myglobetrottertravel.com. Visit our website. There's a contact form on our website, myglobetrottertravel.com. We've got a business phone number that you can call. You can reach out anyway. We're on social, but like I said, email is always the quickest way to get a hold of me. That is what I'm checking the most frequently and able to access when I'm traveling internationally easiest. But yes, I have clients all over the US. So I'm happy to work with people outside of Lansing. I specialize in like African safari and New Zealand and Australia, for example. And so I get a lot of those clients from all over the US because they see my profile on like the New Zealand tourism website. I work with people all over the US, and I'm always happy to discuss trips with people, especially if people haven't worked with a travel advisor before and they're not necessarily sure of the process. I'm happy to walk them through that. Like any other, I think, business, travel advisors are not all created equal. It's one of these industries that basically anybody with a computer and an internet connection could call themselves a travel advisor. So I'm always happy to have an initial chat with people to see if it's a good fit, go through my experience, the trip that they're looking for, and just make sure that our expectations are in line and we can determine if it's a good fit to work together or not. Always happy to chat with people. So please reach out if I can be of assistance.
I love that. And she was so easy to work with. Asked all the right questions because sometimes when we're planning a trip on our own, it's hard to know. I don't know. This is the date. I want everything to be included in an all inclusive. So like she knows the right questions to ask to start thinking of, do you want adult only? I'm going in February. Do we really need an adult only? How many people are really going to be there with their kids in February on the 2nd?
Right.
Okay, we can probably maybe choose a little less expensive resort because we think kids like there is so many things that kind of come up. She is amazing. I highly recommend that if you are looking to plan a trip, especially something that has a lot of logistics, like having somebody else walk you through that logistics portion is so helpful. So, Kim, thank you so much for being here today. I really enjoyed this. And remember, if you have anybody in your life who wants to travel, who has been struggling to travel, who maybe is an avid traveler, and some of these tips you want to make sure they know about, share this episode with them. Let them know why you enjoyed it and why you're sharing the episode with them. And we hope to see you guys all on the next episode. We'll see you then.
Thanks.